I've been bad at titles lately. Let me see what just happened here. No, I just called it The Book of Ruth with Image Comics writer Meredith Finch. I think that's the best way to brand you is Image Comics writer. I know you've done at least a book for Image, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I did Rose. You could just call me comic book writer Meredith Finch too. I feel like I've worked for every single publisher out there at this point.
I just think Image sounds nice. So
it does.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's really nice to meet you. I came across you 100% because I saw this on Indiegogo and it looked like it wasn't quite making its funding goal. And so I just want to make sure it did because I want to promote good biblical content. And then I actually did a little research and saw that you had a wildly successful Kickstarter, and that's probably why there's not as many backers on Indiegogo. So, so it's very cool. This has been going on for a while, and yeah, I mean, congrats on the Kickstarter. You really crushed it there. So
thank you so much. Yeah, I poured everything into the Kickstarter, and when I originally did, I wasn't planning on doing an Indiegogo as well, but I talked to Billy Tucci on his Comics Crusade podcast or live stream. And he's like, oh, you should totally do Indiegogo. He said, because it taps a different market. And I mean, case in point, that's how you heard about it was through the Indiegogo. So yeah, I'm glad I put it up there. I have to be honest though, I was so exhausted after the Kickstarter. I kind of just said, Lord, I'm going to put this on Indiegogo and I'm just going to leave it to you.
Awesome.
So every once in a while, I'll tweet something about it or Facebook it, but it's not the full-time job that Kickstarter was.
I'm trying to tweet it or put the link in various Facebook groups and stuff like that. Dude, I'm super pro at this, as you can tell.
I'm completely incompetent. Otherwise, you'd have my picture on your screen. So.
Yeah, well, it's cool. Yeah, I did just discover it on Indiegogo, which is weird because I'd probably look at Kickstarter a little bit more. I'm surprised I didn't see it there. You might want to get that.
No, I got it. I turned it off. Such is the case when you work from home, right? But yeah,
I'm kind of on that same boat, so I understand. So what got you started on this project? What called you to write about Ruth?
I've been mulling the idea or knowing I was going to do it for a couple of years now. I think almost since the time I was working on Wonder Woman for DC, I just felt like I wanted there to be a book out there or how do I put this? I felt like maybe some of the biblical stories that were done in comic book form were really geared for kids.
Agreed.
And I felt like there was a huge untapped market for that because the stories, you do want to get kids involved in the Bible and understanding it. But I think there's a lot of adults that would benefit from that as well as another means of ministry. So and maybe I would say I was called to do it, that God put that idea. And he specifically, that idea of doing the Book of Ruth, because it's such an accessible book in terms of the biblical stories. So I've been mulling it over and thinking about it and how I wanted to do it for several years. And when I knew that I was going to be finishing up my Rose story through Image, it just seemed like the perfect time. And the fact that I was able to get Colin almost instantly and have that perfect artist for the story, I think it cements the fact that it really was.
Yeah, I'm going to scroll through the art here real quick. Yeah. This is absolutely super high quality. I'm so excited that a biblical comic is getting this quality of comic. The other thing, I guess, elephant in the room about sort of Bible related comics or Christian related comics, I deal with this a lot. I'm primarily a novel writer, and comics are my secondary thing. But the quality of a lot of the Christian comics really suffers a lot of the time, I noticed. And I don't know why that is. This is the same thing in books. Music had the same thing. I think music's really picked up, and I think Christian music's really changed a lot in the last 5-10 years.
I would agree.
But the other arts are lagging behind. It's almost like all the professionals who were Christians who wanted to do something good kind of dipped out of writing about the Bible or Christ or whatnot, and wrote more and just said, I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Christian writer, and would go into the secular realm. And then everybody who was kind of left behind, pun intended, I guess, was, you know, I don't want to say everybody, but I'd say the majority. You open up a Christian book and it's like you see a superhero in a cape like reading you a Bible verse, and it's like, why? You know?
Yeah. No, yeah.
So yeah.
I think that part of the reason that is that it's hard to make a paycheck doing it. Like I'm in a very blessed position that doing this book and paying for the artist, I was able to fund it myself and not sort of have to do the Kickstarter to fund the book. But not everybody's in that position. And
Right.
I think it's hard enough to do a comic book and take that risk to put a comic book out there and to have a good quality artist. Comic book art takes a really long time to produce. A great artist who, like my husband, can do a page a day if he's doing a DC book, but he's been working on a project now for 2.5 years that still hasn't seen the light of day. And it's hard to ask somebody to put that much of themselves for not a lot of financial payoff.
I think, and your project proves this. And what I found because I struggled with that for a while, and I was like, I don't know if I want to put messages in my fiction, etc. You know, what if I put out a book and I call it a Christian book, and you know my audience turns away, right? It's like I'm gonna have a problem for the next several months because I put out a whole novel and what if it bombs, right? But at the same, I think there's an audience that's hungry for this. At the same time, I mean, you obviously found that on Kickstarter that this did better than 95% of the Kickstarters out there. You know, and on my level, I mean, my Christian book shot to #1 immediately, and did better than all my other books combined. So it's I think people are hungry for truth out there. It's just for some reason we've just had this like lull in the arts for the last 20 years where it just hasn't. People just haven't been able to produce and point to Christ. I
think too. I know even for myself when I was initially started promoting the Kickstarter, it's a fine line to dance. I wanted to promote that it was a biblical story and a Christian book, but then I didn't want to turn. It seems an awful thing to say, but I didn't want to turn people off by being too obvious about it. And I really struggled with that when in the first couple of interviews I did about the book. And then I think I just had like this epiphany moment. And I'm like, if God called me to do this and this is what I'm supposed to do, then I have to be proud about what it is and what it represents. And this is the direction that I see my career taking.
Absolutely.
So
I love that. It's a brave leap. And I remember that exact feeling. It's like, you freak out for a second, and then you're like, well, wait a minute. I guess there is an audience for this. But it's always like that. I don't know. I mean, I was kind of thinking about this the other day about how often the point of what God's trying to do to like refine us is to make us uncomfortable and to make us have to actually like, you know, reflect and think upon what we're doing and what's the real point of it. And when we get into that, and when we get into purpose, and I guess this ties into Ruth also, because if you think about it, and actually take the leap of faith and show the faithfulness, he'll provide every single time.
Yeah, it's about making that intentional choice.
Yeah, that dives us right into Ruth because this is how she lived her life.
Yes.
So. Somebody asked in the chat, why did you before we get into that, before we get into the actual meat of the discussion here, why did you change the setting from like the biblical times to like the Depression era?
Because I really think that's one of the reasons why these stories are somewhat difficult for people to access. When you're talking about something that happened 2,000 years ago, it's very easy to dismiss the stories by saying people didn't go through the things that we went through. or that they didn't understand the times that we're living in now. And I wanted to put it into a situation where somebody might just pick it up and understand that this is a story about faith. It doesn't matter where the stories are placed in terms of the time frame of the universe. The intention and the message and the characters and the arcs that they go through resonate across the time, across generations, across cultures. It just is. I didn't want people to feel. I think that's part of the reason why people sometimes dismiss these stories, is because it doesn't feel relevant to them and the times that we're living in. Now, some would say that the Depression's not all that relevant to the times we're living in now, but it's a time that I think we understand.
Yeah, it's a little
understand more easily,
closer culturally. I agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and that's similar to why I write science fiction and not just like, biblical set stories. Though I have toyed with doing one of those as well. But I'm a little scared of misrepresenting the culture from back then, because we have minor details, but there's so much we don't know. And it's really, you have to dig so hard to just kind of figure out what a day in the life for somebody like Ruth would have been like back in the day, which I actually did over the weekend because I wanted to be prepared for this. And so the first thing, of course, I did was read the Book of Ruth, and it's actually pretty short, guys. So if you want to turn to your Bibles real quick, Bible book. Let me pull this up. It's only 4 chapters long, which is kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get in here? Here we go. And I'm probably not going to just read through it, I don't think, because that'd be kind of boring. But the arc of it is, there's this lady Naomi, and she had a pretty bad time. I guess there was a famine going on, and her husband dies, and then her daughters marry off. Right? Is that right? And Ruth is one of those daughters.
Ruth is her daughter-in-law. She has two sons. Yes, 2 sons.
She has 2 sons. Right. Okay. So Ruth and another lady marry to her 2 sons, and both of them die also. So pretty rough time for Naomi here. And so she's an older lady, and is I guess going back home to be among her family now that her whole current family's dead. And she tells her daughters-in-laws, "Hey, why don't you guys go back to wherever you're from, try to make a life for yourselves? I'm sorry this happened," basically. And Ruth says, No. I married into your family, and I'm gonna stay with you and take care of you. Pretty cool. And this is Ruth's first real display of just like honor and integrity. That there's no cultural reason for her to do this. She's not obligated to do this, but she is willing to sacrifice herself to help out this elderly widow, which is the first lesson in here, which is, I think, self-sacrifice, really living for others. Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You did good.
Cool. And the other gal goes off, and Naomi, who changes her name to Mara, not Mara Jade, but Mara. Then I wonder if Mara Jade came from this. I always wonder. I don't know. Short names are a dime a dozen, but it's possible. Anyway, and let's see. They return from Moab, so they move to Moab back to Bethlehem, and this is where it all ties in. This is where it's very interesting with the Bible to me. It's just like everything you could see over the course of these thousands of years, because these are different stories of different people from thousands of years, and they all tie in together, and they all have these similar backgrounds and similar themes going on, where it's obvious when you look at this from a historical context that this is a very finely woven divine plan, and that's very cool to me.
Well, and I think as you read the story of Ruth and you understand this, the ideas of the Kinsman Redeemer that come up through, and then ultimately Ruth is the many times removed grandmother of of the Christ, because she is the grandmother of David, and Christ is born of David's line. So and then Christ is the ultimate redeemer, right? So there really
we'll
are.
Get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
many.
That's the backdrop.
So well woven through these ideas and themes that it really shows for me just how thoughtful God's plan is throughout history, and that even though we don't understand things in the present, we don't know the greater story that's being woven through our own lives.
Right.
Just like Ruth didn't know ultimately what would come of her own faithfulness.
And there's some interesting. So we get into this further, which I guess we'll go into the Redeemer aspect of it. So Ruth ends up, working the fields, and what happened culturally back in the day is, of course, the men worked the fields, and widows, and what they would do is when they would harvest their grains, they would whatever they got and would put into their cart or whatever they had is what they got. Whatever fell to the ground was culturally left there, and they were not supposed to go pick it up. And this was meant to be like an alms to the poor sort of situation, whereas you get your cart of what you harvested, and then what's left over goes to the poor for you're trying to help out in a way. And women widows and orphans and the poor of the town would come by afterwards and just kind of pick up whatever was on the ground, and that's what they'd be allowed to sell or eat or whatnot to be able to help them out. And so that's
Right.
the situation that Ruth fell into right here. And Ruth started working these fields and to do this, and she wasn't doing it on behalf of herself. She was trying to help Naomi. That's where this gets. This woman's just like truly an amazing person who is willing to toil in fields for scraps to be able to help her former mother-in-law out. And so immediately this guy Boaz notices her in the fields and is like, why? Basically it's like, why is this hottie out here in the fields? Because I would imagine you don't usually see a gorgeous woman out in the doing what the poor and the infirm are doing, right?
Right.
So he gets told who she is, that she is related to Naomi, and let's see. He then says, "Don't go back into the field. Stay here with the women who work for me." So he takes compassion on her, or he's trying to schmooze with her a little bit, and gets her out of her situation so she gets in a better spot. And by the way, so this is an interesting verse here where he says, "I've told the men not to lay a hand on you." The people in these positions were not treated very well, to say the least, in general. So he immediately extended protection over her. And this is where we get into the Redeemer aspect of things, which progresses a little bit later. But when you look this up, you start looking up what Kinsman Redeemer is, and this is an ancient Jewish concept, which the writer of this assumed everybody knew at the time, but everybody probably knew at the time. These days we don't really have this culturally, so it's not we're probably reading. When I read this first without researching it, I was like, I don't get this. This is what I wrote my pastor. I'll tell you. It was pretty funny. I said, I just read this, not sure what I'm supposed to glean from this other than a hot young widow should hook up with an old man, which I'm sure is not a takeaway.
And he's like, well.
So, I mean, you probably did a lot of research into this. Do you want to go into the concept there?
Sure. I did do a lot of research, and I also met with my priest multiple times over the course of writing the Book of Ruth.
Are you Catholic?
And I had him. I'm Anglican, which would be Episcopalian.
Cool.
in the States. So I met with him multiple times and had him read through the chapters as I was writing them to make sure that I was true to the intention of the kinds of things the Jewish traditions and the points of the story. And the idea of the kinsman redeemer is that if somebody dies without heirs and leaves a wife like Ruth, somebody would marry Ruth, and then that man's children would basically, he would be giving up his name, and he would be caring for the land, and all of his children would be Elimelech's children, or like Naomi's husband's children. That is the idea of that kinsman redeemer. And that's why in the story, there's somebody who was supposed to be the kinsman redeemer for Naomi, and he says, I can't do it. Or when Boaz confronts him, he says, I'm not willing to give up my name and my children's names to do this. So he wasn't willing to allow his children to and everything he did to be credited to Elimelech, somebody who was already dead. And that's why it was such a noble act for Boaz to do that. And he takes on the role, understanding what he's sacrificing to cast that cloak of protection and redeem
her line, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I mean, it's weird culturally now, but back the Israelites especially really cared about lines and lineages. Like that was they were meticulous about that, and that's why you see so many genealogies and all that throughout the Bible, is because showing the line to the people of that era was almost as important as anything else there. Just showing that Jesus came from David, and David came from Ruth, and Ruth came all the way back to Abraham. All that is really is huge culturally for these people.
Yes.
So continuing the line was very important, and it actually shows Boaz as more than just compassion for Ruth, but actually his care for Naomi's line also.
Yes.
That he really wanted to take care of his family, wanted to take care of those around them, and this is something that, as a man, I think is something that we can look into our life and strive to be like, and show that, like, even though it may not be, quote, the best for us or whatnot materialistically, the care for family and putting the family first and putting your community first is really the most important thing you can do in your entire life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There you go.
I think it was also that idea of the kinsman redeemer was one of the most difficult ideas to reconcile in bringing the story into the
modern times. I was wondering about that.
And so you will find, like, I had to manipulate it a little bit, just because, as important as it is to the story of Ruth, I didn't want to lose. Ultimately, it doesn't work quite in that way within my story. I mean, there's still that him taking care of them, and the idea of somebody giving up something or not being willing to take on the role. But there's some license taken. This is not an exact retelling of the biblical story. So I would say that in that final section, that there's probably the most literary license taken in the story, just because at the end, what I felt like was most important was this idea of Ruth's unwavering faith. So she's the line around which both Naomi and Boaz, their stories ebb and flow. And especially, I felt like this was a real story for Naomi, because you see her constantly fighting against the idea of having faith in God. She's constantly trying to manipulate the situation herself. For example, she tells, there's a famine in Bethlehem, so she and Elimelech leave Bethlehem. They don't trust in God at that time. And then they have this great period of prosperity. But then their sons die and Elimelech dies. And again, Naomi says, she tries to manipulate the situation, says to Orpah and Ruth, leave me. I can't do anything for you. Like she doesn't trust that the things that have happened to her are part of God's plan. She's constantly fighting against it. And I really tried to weave that throughout this story. She sends Ruth to go and lie at Boaz's feet on the threshing room floor as a means of, basically, she has Ruth proposition Boaz.
Right.
So she's constantly, and this is Naomi. Ruth is doing what she's told because she's faithful and she wants to do whatever is best for Naomi. But this is Naomi constantly trying to manipulate the situation and not trusting in God's plan, and until the very end. And that for me was the arc of the story.
Yeah,
that I really wanted to focus on.
And that's that was the shocking part, I guess. So after Ruth is then taken under Boaz's wing, that goes into book or chapter 3, and I guess she goes up to him after he's been drinking. Definitely was a situation where Naomi's like, trying to force Ruth into a position where Boaz takes advantage of her, and therefore in hoping that he'll be forced to provide for her in the way that he ends up doing. But without, but he maintains what's cool about this part is and the hard part on his end is he actually maintains his purity through this. And this is something that, in modern times, we're pretty bad about as a society. And I don't think that's changed since then. I think if a woman comes up and is laying down next to a drunk guy back then, it's going to be the same thing as it is now. But it's amazing that he did that. And I guess maybe it was the Lord straight working through him to not do things the wrong way, but to wait until he was clear-headed to do things the right way. And that's there's really lessons in all of that right there. You shouldn't really push, I guess, into sin when you can wait, you can reflect, you can, take a step back and see what the overall plan is. And that's what Boaz does here. Is he actually goes there? There was a person who was in line to be the Kinsman Redeemer before him, who actually had the right, and it was your closest male next of kin is where it was supposed to be. So whoever's closest to what was the guy's original name?
Elimelech.
Elimelech. Jeez, that's a mouthful. All right,
it was
closest.
Which is why in my story it's Eli and their last name is Melech.
That's cute. And there was another man who was in that position. So Boaz knew that and wasn't just going to, take advantage of Ruth in the moment. And he went and figured things out, talked to the guy, and the guy said he was not into it. Let's see. And Boaz came back and took care of Ruth. And so let's see what happened here. So she lay at his feet until morning. So, I mean, she literally just is so faithful to what Naomi wants, to what she thinks is best for her family, that she really just like goes forward. She just goes straight forward, like almost, we talk about like faith walking or whatnot, right? You blindfold yourself and you just have faith that your path forward is going to be the right one. She just exemplifies that, not even any doubt in her mind whatsoever.
But it's an important point of the story too, that she, and when I didn't want to lose, is that she is ultimately the one who makes the move.
Yes.
Whether he takes her up on the sexual offering that she gives him in that story, which he doesn't, but she still makes the move and says, I want you to take this role in my life,
since you are guardian redeemer of our family, right there. So she puts that in his head right there.
Yeah,
definitely.
And so I did that. That was one thing that, because again, this is another situation where, as I'm retelling the story, in a modern context, in a 20th century context, nobody understands the idea of her laying at his feet.
Right.
That just seems strange. So I had to manipulate it in a situation that the intention being she puts the idea into his head. She propositions him to become her protector. And that was sort of the essence of that scene that I maintained.
Nice. All right. So this is where, so chapter 4 is when we get into Boaz talking to the person who's supposed to be the guardian redeemer there. And at first, so he says, Naomi's come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. And I thought I should bring the matter to your attention, suggest that you buy it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. If you will not, tell me so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except for you, and I am next in line. So the guy actually says he's going to do it, which is then like he's like, oh, the guy's probably just like, oh, land? That's great. I want land.
Yeah.
He's like,
she's got good land. I'll take it.
Great land. So a selfish person in the face of this, again, like, another foil to Boaz, like Naomi is to Ruth, a person who's just out there for themselves real quick. And he shows it. And then Boaz is like, by the way, once you get the land, you also got to marry this dead man's widow.
Yes. And all of her children then become,
his, right.
Elimelech's children, basically.
Yeah. And the guy immediately goes, oh, never mind. I don't want to deal with that baggage. and doesn't even look into it. So it's interesting. It's a little manipulative of Boaz to do it this way. He's definitely, his vested interest is like he wants Ruth at this point, and so he's trying to attain her, which is, honestly, at the end of the day, that's a lot more important than land or anything else. I think so. Beautiful love story right there, if you think about it on that level. And then he takes care of it, and in front of witnesses, may the Lord make the woman who's coming to your home like Rachel and Leah, to build up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrath. Oh, boof. I don't know what that word is. And famous in Bethlehem. I know that.
Yeah.
All right. Through the offspring of the Lord gives you this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. There you go. So there's all they tie everything into history right here. And all of these situations are based on historical traditions and maintaining tradition, maintaining the values of the family. And it's all done the right way. They have both Boaz and Ruth just go forward together, having faith that this is the right way to do things. And it works out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great story. And I do feel I did write it as a love story because I think that it really is what it is. It is
100%. Yeah. And in this very matter of fact way of telling it in the Bible, you don't, I guess a lot of the romance of modern storytelling is not quite there. It's left up to our imaginations. But I bet that works great in a comic.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It made for some great scenes and some very poignant moments, I felt.
Nice. I love romance in comics. I think that the romance genre of comics is vastly underserved. Also,
I would agree. I remember as a young girl growing up reading my mother's romance comics when we would visit my grandmother. I'm like, why don't they have more of these? But
yeah, I don't know why they don't have more of those. I guess it's up to us guys. So let's definitely check this out. And this is where it ties into the overall picture too, because everything in the Bible, and I always look at this in terms of I guess how you look at prophecy. everything prophecy-wise or in the whole tapestry of the Bible always has has multiple layers to it. It's got the layer of what was happening in that moment 3,000 years ago. And it's very apparent what that is. You just read the text and that's what happened. And then it's got the overall picture of how this points to Christ, which is where we get into the genealogy of David. And it looks like, so the line of the family Perez was the father of Herzon. Herzon was the father of Ram, who was the father of this person. Okay, so here we get into Boaz. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. And King David then becomes, the chosen line of Israel. And then that goes all the way down to Christ. So that is the history of how this, I guess, the faithfulness, the purity, and all that, translated through the generations down to Christ. And that's what makes it important in the global context beyond just this moment in time.
I think also it shows God's plan for all people, not just the Jewish people, in the sense that Ruth is a Gentile.
Right.
So she is a Gentile brought into a Jewish family, and she's not the only woman. Tamar also, earlier in that genealogy, is also a Gentile. So this line of Christ is a line that weaves together the Jews and Gentiles from the beginning, from the early days.
That's a great point.
I think it really shows God's plan throughout history. That was always to be the intention.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with that. Sweet. So that's the Book of Ruth in a nutshell. And we have, for those who might be joining us, a comic book adaptation that's set in the Great Depression by Meredith here. And who's your artist's name again? I'm sorry. I feel bad.
Colin Dyer.
Colin Dyer.
Yeah, this will be, I think, his first major published work.
Really?
Yes. He's done some work for, I think it's for the Noah's Ark project. He's done some graphic work for that.
Okay.
But this will be, his first stuff that really goes into a book and gets out there for everybody to see. So.
General Grudge said it way better than we did. The story of Ruth foreshadows how the Gentiles would be brought into the salvation of Christ.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I said.
That's where we're getting to.
I'm a writer. I'm not a public speaker.
Awesome. Thank you, General Grudge.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Well, for not having a major comic published, he's got chops. I mean, you can see his faces are extremely expressive. His figures are loose, and his his camera shots are dynamic, and so you get a good variation. Nothing feels flat in it. So, and his backgrounds are pretty detailed also. So a little bit of every good work.
Honestly, as you go on, it just gets better.
It's awesome.
Because he worked on this for a year and a half, and when you spend time doing something for a year and a half, and he's constantly pushing himself, and the book, my husband, who is also a comic artist, got mad at me because he's like, "You're not even showing the best pages." I'm like, but I want to get the story. So,
so is your husband like David Finch? David Finch?
That's yes.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Okay. I've been reading him forever. I got to tell you that. That's cool. Yeah. So I was. Let's see. He was on Batman for a long time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was reading for a while. Cool. And how many pages is this book?
It, I believe, is 102 pages of story, and then we'll include. I put 112 because I always include extras, so we'll include some of his character designs, some layouts. I like to do more than give you a little bit extra. So there'll be all kinds of stuff. I said 112 pages. Who knows? It could end up being 120, but
yeah, still 100.
The minimum
story is awesome value. And especially look at this. So $20 for 102 102 pages of story by itself is pretty unheard of in the crowdfund era. That's excellent pricing. So I definitely think this is good value for everybody. I love the story. I was so happy to find this, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. Now, do you have plans to, because this has been successful, maybe go back and do a series and do Rachel or Esther or anything like that?
We already know the next one that we're going to do. It's not Rachel or Esther, but it is a woman of the Bible. So we do. I'm like, leave that out there, float that. And so I think that both Colin and I, because Colin is also a person of a very strong faith, this really hits for both of us. Cool. What we want to do with our lives and with our careers. That's awesome.
I should have him on too then.
You absolutely should.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to get it. That's the goal. My goal is to try to build like a community, like where people see the different projects out there, and it's both. It's a fine line between like promoting indie art and promoting Christian art. And so I want to do a little of both, and hopefully weave both together and spiral everything into a big something that grows. I don't know. So,
well, cool. One of the blessings of this book is really everybody who worked on it is a person of faith.
That's awesome.
And that was really important to me. Like there are a lot of different people I could have asked for variant covers, but I asked people who I knew were believers and who I had a personal relationship, and I knew had a personal relationship with God.
Let me go through the variant covers. Okay, David Finch, that makes sense.
Yep.
Let's see, Jason. That's pretty. I don't know who he is, unfortunately. I don't know a lot of people's names. I'm sorry.
Oh, Jason. He's a Batman guy too.
He's a Batman guy too. Sweet.
Jeff Johns. And he is incredible.
Cool. So you have to tell me who everybody is. I know who Billy Tucci is. Cool. Beautiful.
And you should know who Lee Weeks is.
I know who Lee Weeks is. Yep.
Yeah. And those are the variants.
Cool. Wow. You got heavy hitters on this. This is pretty amazing. Sweet.
I give credit to God. All I did was put it out there, and He made the decision in their heart for them.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's it. I guess I could spend another hour. I guess I got a few more minutes here. So I know very little about you, and I'm sorry about that too. Right. Like I said, I was just really interested in this project. And so, how did you get into comics? What's your story?
So, I'm married, as we discovered. I'm married to David Finch, who's been in comics for 26 years. I met him in 2007. At the time, I was a single mom with 2 kids. And when he told me he did comics, I thought he meant like for the newspaper. So I was like, oh, which strip are you drawing? He's like, no, not that. And for a long time, it was just something he did. And I would always joke with him, you do comics, I read books, because there's no words in comics. And it took me a really long time to understand how to read a comic, that you don't just go word balloon to word balloon to word balloon, but you have to take in what's happening in the panel. And it's almost like a stop motion film. And then you read the dialogue. And it was actually Kevin Smith's Daredevil that I read, that I think I was waiting for Dave. We were going to go out for lunch, and I just picked a comic off his shelf at random, and I couldn't put it down. He's like, okay, let's go for lunch. I'm like, I'll be right there, just a minute. And that's when I knew that there truly is a comic for everybody. There's a story for everybody to connect with and relate with, and you just have to find the right one.
Yeah, it's such a wide open medium. We've already talked about just like how there used to be, especially if you get back into, I don't know if you've gone back to like historical comics a lot, but if you get into like the 40s through, before the superhero era started really, there were so many different magazines with so many, you'd have your slice of life, Archie stuff. You'd have even Jack Kirby was doing romance comics back then. You'd have your creepy and eerie horror stuff that was such off the wall horror that like it's stuff that couldn't even be imagined today. You had science fiction books, you had fantasy books, you had pirate books, you had, I mean, they were so all over the map. And of course, Tarzan had a lot of comics back then too, and clones of Tarzan, and Westerns. I miss Westerns too. That's the other thing. We've really gotten limited in scope to where it's like people in America, at least, think of comics as superhero, which, I'm propagating that since I'm writing mostly superhero comics, but you can do anything with it. It's such a cool medium.
Well, and I think that's why the indie comic stream has become so popular, because it is the place where people are doing something different from your traditional superhero. It's why Image is such a huge publisher, because a lot of what they don't really do superhero comics. They do those, horror comics or Western comics or sci-fi comics. But yeah, it's nice to see that it's like that circle we're coming back around full circle and understanding that there is room for more than just the superhero genre of comics.
Yeah, and I think that when you, especially getting into Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all that, we're seeing a lot more of that too. It's allowing a platform where, the unfortunate reality of the comic book store is incentivized to just put Marvel, DC in front of the audience eyes, because that's what's going to sell. And so all of the shelf space is taken up by that. I was watching a YouTube channel by a major comic collector, and he's just like, he was going through stuff and he's like, I don't even remember seeing, this Image book or this Valiant book like in the comic shop at all. I mean, he says, I don't know if I'm just a bad customer, not looking at the indie stuff, but like, or if my comic shop just doesn't really display them. But that is the reality, is a lot of projects like this would not really get seen in the comic shop. And that is sort of the blessing of the internet, that we can get this stuff out here where that wasn't able to be done before.
Well, and it was really the reason why I decided to kickstart and do Indiegogo, just to get it in front of more people.
Yeah.
Then I didn't want it to just sit at the back of a previews catalog at the bottom of page 525.
Yeah. Where issue one, some people pick it up and then everybody forgets to pick it up for issue 2, and then nobody reads the
exactly. Because I did think about doing it as 4 separate comics, and then I thought, and Dave said to me, and I agree with them. He's like, I don't think people will come back for issue 2 because of the way the story moves. And I think it works ultimately so much better as a graphic novel.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could see that just from the way that the Bible story is constructed.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you want to say before we head out? I would say thank you to everybody who supported it through the Kickstarter, and everybody who has supported it so far through Indiegogo. There's a beautiful video, I think. If you want to see more of the art than what's just on the Indiegogo page, you'll be able to see a few more panels, and I think the video gives you a good idea of the story that we're trying to tell through this comic. Awesome. Videos don't work very well while playing them in this
setup.
No. So
you have to go to the Indiegogo page to watch it.
Yeah. And I put that down in the chat below, guys, or in the description. I put it in the chat a little bit earlier also. So please check this out and support Meredith, support good Christian art. That's what we're here to do. And when's this? Is it almost complete on the?
The artwork is complete. Colin turned in the last 2 pages to me yesterday. So now I think he has one more chapter cover to do, and then I'll be just finalizing dialogue over the month of December, and then we'll getting it together, and then we'll be sending it off to the printer. So once I have it all together, everybody will be getting their hopefully PDF versions by the end of January.
Sweet, pretty close.
And then I already am very blessed. I have a publisher who's contacted me, and so anybody who supports the Kickstarter, the Indiegogo, will get their book by April at the latest. But then they're going to be putting it out in May. So that's very exciting.
Cool. So you're able to get into every market on this. That's great.
Yeah. It'll be Cave. If you're familiar with Christian publishing or Cave Pictures Publishing is a new publisher in the comic book market, and they've done some really great stories.
Let's look them up.
You should, because Billy Tucci's written. Yes, there they are, right there. They've done a couple stories. Appalachian Apocalypse. I wrote for them an adaptation of George MacDonald's Light Princess, and I'm doing another adaptation for them of another George MacDonald story. Their goal is just to put out quality, intentional.
We've opened up a can of worms of people I want to get on my show now. This is awesome. Cool. Okay. Yeah, definitely check out this website. I'll throw this into the chat real quick too. And do you guys have any questions for Meredith? Because we've got a lot of let's see. Got a lot of comments so far, but I haven't had many questions as of late. So, but if you have any questions,
just means we're doing a good job.
Guys, that's right. We explained everything very well.
That's right.
Okay. I guess I'll go back to work then. That's my life, right?
If it makes you feel better, that's what I'm doing too.
Sweet. Definitely thanks for joining me. And I hope you get a few backers out of this at least. And we'll definitely have you on when you got your next book down the pipeline and try to promote that for you too. So
sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.